table saw, which is really the best tool for ripping to width. The first thing we got to determine is what kind of blade we want to use. And there's really only two choices in this particular case. We can use a rip blade, which has a relatively small number of teeth, usually about 20 to 30 teeth. And this does a great job at ripping along the grain. The lower number of teeth reduces the amount of friction in the wood and allows for a fairly efficient cut. The only thing with a true rip blade is sometimes it leaves a relatively rough cut surface, depending on the quality of the blade that you have. It's very efficient, it allows you to rip quickly, but it doesn't give you necessarily the best cut. If I'm ripping just a lot of wood that I'm going to then deal with later, or I'm going to be not worried about the edge that I'm getting because I'm going to mill it off later for some reason, I'll use a rip blade if I have a lot to do because it'll be quicker. If I don't have as much to do, what I'm going to use is a high quality combination blade, which is what I have on here. It's got 30 to 50 teeth. The high quality blades are designed to give you a very nice rip and a good cross cut as well on the wood. Crosscut blades are going to have many more teeth, anywhere from 60 to 120 teeth. This is not good for ripping with the grain of the fibers of the wood because it'll cause too much friction. You could even start smoking, start a fire inside of your saw. This is strictly used for cross cutting or for plywood. So since I just got one board to rip and I want a really good edge on it and I'm not worried about speed, I'm going to use my crosscut blade to give me a really nice surface. Here again, I want to use a test piece to double check my width. We're shooting for accuracy at this point. We want very square edges. We want exactly if I want 5.5 inches, which is what I'm shooting for, I want exactly 5.5 inches. So I'm going to set my fence to 5.5 inches on here, but I can't really trust that this is exactly right. If I'm in my own shop all by myself and I know that I've dialed this in, I might get away with it. But if I'm in a shop that I'm sharing with people, you can never tell if this gets knocked out of whack or whatever. So it's always safest to do a little test cut on a test piece and double check it before you go. So what I'm going to do is turn the saw on and just push the test board into the blade and pull it back and measure and see if I'm at 5.5 inches or not. I don't have to go very far in because I don't want to waste the whole board. Just if I cut this all the way through and it was the wrong width, maybe it was just under 5.5 inches, I'd have to go find another test piece. So I'm going to double check, and that's right at 5.5 inches. If it wasn't, I would go and adjust a little bit and try it again. But now the other thing I do want to check is that this is cutting square. I can again use my square and put it up against the blade and double check, but that's not as good as, that's a great way to get me almost there or roughly there, but the real test is to actually rip a piece and double check for square. So I'm going to do that first. Same thing. I'm going to use my small square. Set it on here and slowly move it down. And that's perfectly square, so I know I'm good. And I don't have a lot of saw marks on there. I'm getting a pretty smooth cut. So now I'm ready to cut my actual piece. I'm going to use dust collection this time. Now we got our two edges done. So we've done our faces and our edges. A couple things I want to talk about when we're on the table saw here is, one, if you have a blade guard, use it. If it's too narrow to use your blade guard, you should use a push stick to keep your hands out of the way, so they don't get too close to the blade. The other thing is, if you have a riving knife or a splitter, it's a good thing to use when you're ripping solid wood, because like we talked about earlier with the tension wood, if this started to go through and was pinching the blade, if I didn't have this riving knife back here or a splitter, it could cause it to pinch the blade and kick back at me. So it's very important to use that when you can, if you've got it, and keep it on the saw at all times. A really important thing to remember when ripping on the table saw is hand position on the board. If you watch as I push this through, I'm going to find kind of the mental 50% spot point on the board here in terms of width, and I'm going to keep my thumb just to the left of that 50% point and put my fingers up here on the top, and I'm going to push it through. And notice it's staying right up against the fence. A natural tendency that a lot of people have is to push very close to the fence. I guess it's to keep your hand out of the way of the blade. But watch what happens if I push from here. The board is coming away from the fence, considerably in this case. That's because my pressure is kind of pushing it away. By having my hand over here, it's sort of keeping the pressure up against the fence here. And that's going to give me a better cut. If it's doing this and coming away from the fence, what's going to happen is, at the very end of the board here, I'm going to have a narrower dimension than when I started, because I'm going to be taking too much material off. And I'm going to be getting more saw marks and so on. The other thing that's very, very important to remember is, do not remove your hand from the cut until it's all the way past the blade. You want to push it through. The reason you have kickbacks on any saw or any tool is because you have the wood trapped between the blade and the fence. If I let go, the blade is spinning back this way, it's going to shoot it right out back at me. So resist the tendency to let go when it's almost through the cut. Push it all the way through and then let go. Last step is to cut this to length. Remember, we have a little bit of snipe and I can feel it. Right about here is where it starts. It's hard to see, but use your fingers to feel it. It'll give me an idea where the snipe is. The snipe is there. And on this end, it doesn't feel quite as bad, but I can see it right about there. So that only gives me about 20¼ inches between those two marks, which is enough because I only need to get down to 18 inches. And I've got a whole bunch of choices for tools to do this. If you have a chop saw that's very accurately set up and you know that it'll cut square, you can use that. We have a large panel saw here that we can use to cross-cut things. One of the simplest methods is to set up your miter gauge on a table saw, maybe a stop of some sort that you can use for cross-cutting. You can also build a cross-cut sled. Any way that you can set up to safely cut the end square off the board you can use. So I'm going to use this. It's really important to make sure that we cut both ends because, number one, this is not a square end. We know that because it was just, and you can see it on this one, it's still from the rough end of the board. And we want to make sure that we're getting a square cut. So we're going to cut, and we got to get the snipe off. So I've chosen a crosscut blade in this particular case. You can see there's quite a few teeth. They come to a beveled point, almost like a chisel. So it's good for slicing the grain going across the grain. And I'm going to set this, and I didn't talk about it when we were back cutting the last board, but for safety's sake, we like to keep, particularly if you don't have a good guard, we like to keep the blade as low as we can keep it while still being able to efficiently cut the board. So one good rule of thumb is to set the height of the blade so that the gullets on the teeth are just above there. The bottom of the gullet is just above the surface of the board. Now actually you get the most efficient cut with the blade up as high as you can get it because it comes down at the proper angle for a clean cut, but it's not the safest way to cut. So we typically just set it about like this. And what I'm going to do is, the first cut is just to square off an end. I'm not cutting it to length yet. So I'm taking the stop up, and I'm just going to roughly eyeball where my snipe is, and I'm going to cut that off. And the other thing I can do then is double check that we're getting a square cut in both directions. So we'll cut a little bit off here and see what we got going. I need to hold it tightly so it doesn't slip back and forth as I'm going through the cut. Now I need to use my square to check two things here. One, am I getting a square cut this way? That looks really good. The other thing I need to check is, am I getting a square cut this way? And that also looks good. So once I know that I've got a square cut on this end, and if it wasn't, I could adjust this a little bit and cut this again, as long as I have enough room to make the dimension that I want. Right, now that I know I'm cutting square, I'm going to take a test piece and set my stop so that I'm cutting the 18 inches that I want. So one way, if I don't have any a tape on here to help me, what I can do is just maybe make a mark here at 18 inches. Eyeball it so it's close. And I might err on the side of being a little long right now because I can always keep cutting my test piece down, but if I cut it too short, I'm going to have a bunch of test pieces. So I'm going to set my stop here. And again, I'm going to just nip the board. I'm not going to cut all the way through. That way I can keep reusing it if I need to. Just a hair over 18 inches. I'm going to stop in just a little bit. And try again. Again, I'm shooting for very accurate here. So I'm right at 18 inches. So I can make my last cut. Make sure to cut the right end off. I've still got this mark for my snipe over on the other end, so I know I'm cutting the right end. The other thing I could do when I made this cut over here is put a little mark on there that indicates that that's already a square corner. So I make sure I turn it around. Again, hold it very tight. Make sure it's up against the stop. It's tempting when I have one board not to set a stop, but it's always good to set a stop on there. One, it helps the board from moving when you're running it through, so you get a good square cut. If you're having trouble on that initial cut, where you're just squaring off the end, if you're having trouble holding it in place, you can even set a stop for rough cutting, because it'll keep the board from moving on you, and it'll make sure that you get a square cut. But also, if you're running multiple boards, you have to have a stop. There's no way you're going to mark each board and cut it and get everything to the exact same length. Because if we're cutting multiples the same length, if we're building a door or something, it's very important that they're all exactly the same length. So a stop really helps with that. So that's it. We've cut it to length, we've cut it to width, and we've got square corners and edges all the way around. So it's ready for doing our joinery.